Hi, I'm David Marchant, the founder of OffshoreAlert, which investigates participants in high-value cross-border finance with an emphasis on high-confidentiality jurisdictions. Our specialty is exposing investment fraud while it's in progress. Enjoy our content.
Hello, thank you for joining me today. My name is Chris Hinkley. I work for Armor Cloud Security, and I am the head of the Threat Resistance Unit here at Armor. I have about 15 years of cybersecurity experience, a lot of that in threat research and threat intelligence, and a few certifications, including the Offensive Security Certified Professional, which is an offensive security certificate. Today we're going to cover the dark market report that Armor has done for the last 3 years. We'll be covering the business of the dark market, the forums, the marketplaces that make up the illicit underground of the dark market. We'll look at what's being sold on these markets. Cybercrime as a service is a large one, illicit goods, scams, phishing, user data, company data, that kind of stuff. We'll also look at how to be vigilant against falling prey or falling victim to this data or these attackers. How to protect your data from ending up on the dark market, how to protect yourself from being scammed from people that buy stuff on the dark market, and protect yourself from malware and even business destruction, as we'll discover later. And then I'll save some time at the end of this presentation for some questions and answers. So just jumping right in, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Everybody's possibly heard of the dark web or the deep web, but if we were to ask people, probably get about 15, 20 different definitions. So to start on the same page, just kind of define these real quick. The surface web, or what we all know as the internet, is essentially everything indexed by Google, by Bing, by any of your search engines. Without the search engines, if you didn't know where a website was, you simply search. It's a directory, obviously. It tells you where to go. So that's a majority of the internet, 99% of the internet, so to speak, at least as we know it. A larger part of that entire internet, I guess, is the deep web. And this is generally innocuous stuff, but this is stuff protected by firewalls, passwords, your authorization pages, and whatnot. But this is stuff that's not indexed by Google. What we're here to talk about today, though, when people say the dark web or the dark market or the deep web, some people refer to it as Tor. This is going to be where a majority of illicit activity goes on. There's obviously some legal activity there, but generally speaking, the dark alleyways of the internet where your dark markets reside. You've got your forums where people share hacking tips and malware and share data and database dumps and whatnot. But many of these sites are only accessible using specific technology such as Tor, which is a series of proxies or a piece of software that routes your internet traffic through a series of proxies to provide anonymity. But even then, there's no search engine generally on the dark web, so you're going to have to know exactly where to go using generally an ephemeral or random web address that's shared through back channels and things of that nature. So even if you were to get on Tor, you're not always going to be able to find what you're looking for, so to speak. So those three sections of the internet kind of make up the entirety, but today we're going to focus on the dark web and more specifically the dark market, and figure out what exists there and how to protect yourself from it. So threat intelligence, or being able to protect yourself from something, if you ask a lot of cybersecurity professionals, they're going to ask, do you know what assets you have? Asset management is a huge part of protecting yourself, but threat intelligence makes up that other piece. If you know what you have to protect against, or to protect, you also need to know what to protect against. So using threat intelligence specifically from the dark market, where it's kind of ground zero for attackers and threat actors, you get to learn a lot of the TTPs. You get to learn the kind of the new hotness, so to speak, but also being able to understand the evolving threat landscape. If you were to go get a set of threat intelligence and apply that to your security devices or your security measures or countermeasures, that's a moment in time where the threat actors and attackers are constantly evolving their threats. They're constantly developing new and better ways to attack you and circumvent your security measures. So threat intel essentially allows you to make better risk decisions, knowing these TTPs or tactics, techniques, and procedures. These markets on the dark web that we'll discover here show the depth and breadth of the threats that we have to protect ourselves against, but then also how data is monetized. It helps also to know what threat actors are targeting, whether it's the financial sector, whether it's healthcare sector, and knowing if you're a high-risk target or a low-value target, so to speak. As we move deeper into the dark web, I guess you can say, there's a double-edged sword, one side being anonymity. That's a hard word to say, anonymity, and then security. So Tor, as we mentioned earlier, if you're familiar in movies and whatnot, when someone's trying to trace somebody through the internet, and they have a world map showing proxies bouncing all over the place and the internet traffic being routed around the world. Tor is similar to that, I guess, in the real world, where it's not necessarily around the world all the time, but if you were to connect through the Tor network, it would route your traffic through a bunch of random proxies and then spit it out on the other end to where it's harder to attribute a user or a specific identity to that particular traffic. Granted, that traffic's not always secure. So on the other end, you have your PGP, which is a commercial product, but GPG is also an open source product that encrypts using private key infrastructure. But it encrypts messages securely using encryption. So a combination of the both technologies, Tor and PGP or GPG, you have anonymity and security. So a lot of visitors to the dark market or the deep web, dark web rather, use Tor and PGP. Tor is required in most aspects to access some of these dark markets. These anonymous marketplaces use trustless environments. So if you're making an illegal deal, you don't trust the other party, and the seller doesn't trust the buyer, and the buyer doesn't trust the seller, so to speak. So a lot of the dark markets are built with escrow systems. In fact, one of the most notorious dark markets, Silk Road, developed or launched, I guess, in 2011 by Ross Ulbricht. Was kind of the proof of concept dark web market. They were the first to use cryptocurrency. They kind of changed our perception of dark market dealings, but they also implemented PGP communications in escrow. So when someone went to go buy something from a seller, they would put that money in escrow. That quote-unquote neutral party would hold the funds until the goods were received, whether it's digital or otherwise, and then payment would be made. In 2013, they got shut down, and interestingly enough, Ross Ulbricht got sentenced to a few life terms and 40 years for creating the site. He was essentially held responsible for what was sold there. But there's been tons and tons of new dark markets that sprung up since then, one being Silk Road 2.0, which got shut down. But we have new markets such as Empire Market with hundreds of thousands of users. We've got White House Market, and the list goes on. But what's interesting is that Silk Road kind of laid that foundation for the architecture of dark markets. In fact, Alibaba, which is the second largest online retailer, Amazon, took some of the technological features from Silk Road and implemented it there. So that was kind of pivotal, I guess, in the evolution of dark markets over time. Dark markets is based on our research, and we've researched the dark web for years. This year was interesting, but we've noticed that there's been at least a claimed and some verifiable data to support at least 1 million monthly users to some of these dark markets. And these dark markets, again, will sell anything from stolen data to hard drugs, heroin, cocaine, that kind of stuff, to malware, the hardware to carry out some of these threats and whatnot, and even logins. But there's specialized markets. So think of it as a kind of a knockoff eBay or Amazon. You can literally go to one of these dark markets and select a category to be able to look for exactly what you're looking for. Some of these listed here on the slide. One of the interesting things we noticed this year, and when you look at dark markets, they thrive in times of war, they thrive in times of political turmoil, but this year they seem to unfortunately thrive because of COVID-19, whether it's bootleg cures, whether it's price gouge PPE. In fact, some standard surgical masks, N95 surgical masks that go for relatively cheap, we're selling for 500, 600% markup just because they were available here in the dark market. You couldn't find them anywhere else. We've also seen things like chloroquine, which is not a valid cure or treatment for COVID-19. Hydroxychloroquine has had mixed results, but it's a derivative of chloroquine. But people are preying on the fear and uncertainty of folks, at least on the dark web, to sell these things for an astronomical amount of money, whether it's an antibody test or a claimed antibody test or even drugs, but even some bigger name pharmaceutical drugs. But that's been an interesting trend we've been seeing this year, at least in the dark market. So there's no lack of opportunity on the dark market, and absolutely no missed opportunity, at least from what we've seen based on the current events. We talked a little bit about cryptocurrency, but Tor obviously provides that anonymity from an internet traffic if used correctly. We talked about PGP from a security standpoint, but cryptocurrency has kind of fallen into a niche in the dark market, whether it's Bitcoin, which is the most famous of cryptos, to any of the other thousands of cryptocurrencies that exist. But crypto is essentially cash on the internet, cash in real life. If you were going to buy illicit goods, whether drugs or otherwise, in the non-digital world, you would use cash. You don't want a paper trail. In the same role in the dark web, you would use cryptocurrency. It's essentially the cash of the internet. And while there's some pseudo-anonymous coins, Bitcoin is not fully anonymous. There's other cryptocurrencies, Monero, Zcash, Dash. Those have more anonymous qualities to them, and they're just as viable as in terms of market cap. In fact, the market cap is insane if you were to go look at cryptocurrency market cap. But those three cryptos, at least from a popularity standpoint, are viable from an anonymity standpoint. In fact, if you go look back to the WannaCry outbreak, the ransomware outbreak a few years ago, the threat actors required ransom through Bitcoin, and tons of ransom was paid just simply because of organizations wanting their data back and whatnot. And the FBI was tracking that Bitcoin flow for a while. In fact, with Bitcoin, you can see wallet relationships and whatnot. And at one point, the threat actors converted all that and laundered it into Monero, and they were essentially gone in the wind. So there's benefits to certain cryptocurrencies and things of that nature. Bitcoin's value has gone exponentially high. I think right now it's around $20,000. They expect it to be over $100,000 by the end of next year as far as one Bitcoin worth. But it's an excellent it's an excellent mechanism or vessel to obscure payments, to kind of hide or help with the anonymity standpoint of the dark web, and it's kind of fallen into a niche there. And there's almost zero barrier to entry in regards to crypto. When you start looking into what's being sold on the dark market, it's kind of limitless. We mentioned some of the COVID-19 stuff earlier. One thing that is interesting is data. Obviously, data is intangible, but it's very valuable, especially in terms of what it can be used for. One of the things that is very popular on the dark web is called fools. Again, slang for full information. But essentially, it's all the information someone would need to either to commit identity fraud, to potentially apply for loans, to do anything that a normal person would do financially or otherwise with that data. Personal fools. This information is generally easy to come by. If you go look on certain websites to see whether or not information's been stolen through the use of a hack or a dump or something of that nature. Username, password, address, social security number, proof of insurance, that kind of stuff is easily found, especially when you look through or when you look at organizations that have had their data stolen, like financial institutions, where that data is easily available. And personal fools can go for as cheap as $10. $10 to $15 to $20, depending on what the information is. And business fools is the same information, except for an organization, which is a little bit more dangerous, but that goes for anywhere from $30 to $60. So it's very inexpensive to get this data. But again, the sellers of this information are the procurers, and they're putting a little bit of space in between them and the risk, so to speak. And speaking of risk, just a quick aside, speaking to some law enforcement acquaintances of mine, there's less than 1% of financial fraud data that's ever prosecuted. And that's simply a combination of manpower with the widespread nature of financial fraud, whether that's digital or non-digital. And then you go to the dark web side, where there's a lot of technological barrier to entry, potentially with the anonymity and finding the websites and understanding the way it works, and then the general lack of knowledge on the cyber side in regards to manpower. So the risk is relatively low when people start getting into this type of data, but the payout is generally high for a lot of these threat actors. Moving on real quick, I mentioned the cost of business fools earlier. Financial loan applications, we were talking about stolen financial stuff in regards to being able to use that for nefarious purposes. I think in July of 2019, First American Financial was hacked, and they're the largest real estate title insurance company in the U.S. So all that information is out on the internet places, and I'm sure most of it, if not all of it's being sold on the dark web. Capital One's been breached. Microsoft has been breached. There's been close to 1 billion individuals, probably, as far as loan applications that have been breached and leaked. So that information is out there, and not all that is necessarily financial. PHI, health information, insurance information, you name it, it's out there. And there's some examples here on the slides on the right for some listings of some of this data. But it's very interesting, to say the least, and unsettling as well. Credit cards and money laundering has been huge. Obviously, the premise of the dark market is to make money, but there's been a trend over the last year or so where folks are kind of laundering, and again, the trend is removing themselves from the risk, at least from putting as many degrees of separation as they can between them and potential law enforcement. But money is going for 10 cents on the dollar, whether that's bank transfers, PayPal transfers, Western Union transfers. As a nefarious individual, someone could go on the dark web and say, I want $1,000, and they would go pay $100 to someone, and then depending on what method of transfer they'd like to use, they'd have that money, for $100, they'd have $1,000 in whatever account that they wish. Cloned ATM debit cards, that's age old. A lot of these with pins, and a lot of times too, verifiable balances, or at least accurate estimates of balances on these cards or funds. And then obviously private information hacking. As you move into more of the exploit or computer hacking, ransomware side of things, tons of if you're part of IT, or if you know someone in IT that's ever put an asset on the internet, whether it's spinning up an AWS server, exposing your home computer to the internet, any kind of computer that's on the internet that is firewalled or not, and you have the metrics in order to see potential attacks on that infrastructure. If you were to go spin up a VM right now in Amazon or Google or Azure or wherever, immediately you would start to get pings or hits or port scans or malware scans against your infrastructure, simply because that IP address space is known, but also a majority of the traffic on the internet, unfortunately, is malicious, whether that's scanning for vulnerabilities and whatnot. And unfortunately, not everyone's protecting their infrastructure very well, whether that's a personal server spun up on AWS or part of a Fortune 50 company infrastructure spun up on a cloud infrastructure somewhere, or even on their own infrastructure exposed to the internet. They're constantly being scanned for vulnerabilities, and a lot of those servers get compromised simply because of default configurations, unpatched software, you name it. But then those are either become part of a botnet. That infrastructure is then set dormant as far as the threat actor, so they're able to potentially look and see at some point that if there is anything valuable on that server, dwell time could be high. But on the dark market, if you don't want to spend the time hacking a server, if you don't want to spend the time researching and compromising potential infrastructure, you can go buy it. If you want to buy a hacked server, if you want to buy a botnet, it's all available on the dark web, which is kind of scary. Also, if you have infrastructure that you know is vulnerable and you want to attack it, you don't necessarily have the tools, you can buy the tools. It's kind of a smorgasbord, if you will, of whatever you need. You need it, we got it, is kind of the motto as far as the dark web's concerned. So tons of potential tools and data and all sorts of information that you're able to get on the dark web. And I guess the takeaway here is anything you need to perform an illicit activity, it's on the internet. In fact, back in the Silk Road days, there was rumors and even posts, and unknown how legitimate this is, but there were people hiring potential hitmen to carry out murder, essentially. So everything from a credit card to things much more serious. As you start to get into these tools and whatnot, there's been a trend in lowering the barrier to entry, whether that's you don't necessarily have the technical skills to get into maybe ransomware, or you want to sell potential assets, but you don't want to do it on a dark market. You want to make your own website. Anything that requires technical skill, time, money, talent is sold. Also, if you want to perform some sort of affiliate program, advertising, the means are limitless. In fact, a lot of organizations are starting to run more like legit businesses in terms of, like I mentioned earlier, affiliate programs, customer service, live chat, tutorials, knowledge bases, you name it. If you want to buy hacked servers, like I mentioned, there's remote desktop connections to servers that username and passwords are known. And those are sometimes being sold as kind of untouched or pristine to where no one else has had access to them, so exclusive access. If you have a ransomware campaign you want to carry out, but you don't want to spend the time coding the ransomware or customizing it to your liking, ransomware as a service was big towards the beginning of this year and the end of last year. Ransomware's kind of dropped off a little bit, but it's still very large and very lucrative as far as a low risk, high reward, illegal activity for these criminals. As far as cybercrime is concerned, it's not necessarily related to specific pieces of infrastructure. It's not always isolated to a specific account or a specific bank account. A trend we've noticed this past year is kind of business assassination for hire, to kind of reference something I spoke earlier about. But if you have a competitor and you are not above being a criminal, it's very easy to go purchase specific services to destroy that business, or at least DOS them or DDoS them, perform a denial of service attack against them to where they're no longer operable or effective at what they do. If you're looking for someone to, destroy a business just however they see fit, easy, less than $200. If you want them to SMS bomb a set of specific phones, email spam, contact form spam, take down their website, unfortunately, that's it's relatively cheap nowadays, and it's extremely effective in some cases to shutting down certain organizations or businesses. But that's one thing that we've seen is a lot is not cyber espionage, but cyber sabotage in regards to some of these businesses and services that we've come to see. Talked a little bit about ransomware earlier. It's not as big as it used to be. In fact, it's large still, but it's not nearly making the rounds on the news like it was every other day for a while there. But as ransomware has evolved, and ransomware kind of trends to flavor of the week or flavor of the month, depending on what the newest and hottest ransomware is as far as effectiveness is concerned. But generally, when you speak about ransomware, you're talking about a threat actor compromising infrastructure, looking for important data and encrypting it, and then demanding payment to decrypt your data. A lot of organizations, fortunately, have great backup strategies. They have great recovery strategies and business continuity plans that allow them to basically say, screw you, I'm going to restore my data, figure out where this came from, we'll protect it, and you wasted all that effort for nothing. A lot of other businesses have to pay, but at the end of the day, it's kind of a binary transaction. Pay and get your data, hopefully, or don't pay and use your business continuity plan or your business restoration as far as your data is concerned in order to get that data back. Nowadays, the attackers have gotten a little bit smart. They've kind of put a little twist on the ransomware game that kind of maximizes their return on their effort and provides a little bit more sense of urgency, and unfortunately puts the victim in a tighter spot in a sense that before that data is encrypted now, the ransomware perpetrator is actually copying that data off to another server and threatening to dump that data, expose that data, or even sell that data, depending on what the data is, if the victim does not pay. So now, even if you have good backup plans, even if you have good business continuity plans, and you're able to restore that data without having to pay, your data is still out there because that ransomware attacker finally got a little bit smarter and is copying the data off before encrypting it on your side. So it's kind of like a dual-edged attack at that point. When we were talking about ransomware and even cybercrime earlier, a lot of these acts are low risk, high reward, even more so with ransomware, especially when the only tie back to you outside of potential forensic investigation that may tie the initial intrusion to you is the cryptocurrency. And if you use something, again, that's very high in the anonymity technology department, then it's very low chance that you'll get caught or prosecuted. And I say you in terms of a threat actor, but here, bullet point on the slide is they're rarely prosecuted or arrested, and it's rarely reported in as well. If a high-profile business gets caught by ransomware, if they're not obligated to do so legally, there's no benefit to them reporting that necessarily, because it's going to impact their reputation, it's going to impact their brand, and potentially impact their bottom line. But ransomware is obviously evolving. We talked a little bit about COVID earlier. Unfortunately, COVID has been a huge issue all over the world, but to not leaving any opportunity on the table, the dark market and cyber criminals have taken advantage of this. And I mentioned chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine earlier. It was hydroxychloroquine was advertised as a potential treatment, and chloroquine, which is not the same thing, obviously, was sold, as was hydroxychloroquine. PPE was sold whenever that was whenever the panic was high. PPE was sold, and again, that was 100% to 500% markup. And there's no guarantee you're going to get what you pay for. If someone says it's an N95 mask and they can put an N95 sticker on there, it doesn't necessarily mean it's an N95 mask. COVID-19 testing kits, again, there's no guarantee to the efficacy of those, but those are being sold. And then, unfortunately, coronavirus deals on recreational drugs. COVID sells on your run-of-the-mill drugs. One of the interesting things we saw in regards to the COVID exploitation is phishing and scamming. There was tons of tools created to scam folks in regards to COVID-19, again, preying on their fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But whether it was testing kits, whether it was PPE, whether it was signing up to get the latest news or visiting a site that might infect their computer with a drive-by download, the guise of COVID-19 was being used in the same old phishing and scamming techniques, which was unfortunate to see. In regards to kind of understanding the challenges of COVID, whether it's compliance, whether it's remote work, it seems that a majority of folks are more concerned about risk targeting work from home individuals. It seems that a lot of folks, including our office, has allowed work from home simply because of COVID going on and being able to social distance better and whatnot. There's also a large percentage of organizations that think that the COVID-19 pandemic will impact the way, I guess, risk evaluation is done on the organization. Again, that's probably due to changes in infrastructure and changes in the way daily activities are done. And when you start to look at the way infrastructure is changing and COVID is changing the way we do business, there's a huge shift in the attack surface or the potential attack surface of an organization, and a huge shift in the way kind of the inside out protection was done, as opposed to kind of now disparate ambiguous infrastructure around where employees are now using infrastructure that's not part of the corporate environment. So kind of just to recap a little bit, cyber criminals are constantly making money from data, from tools, from financial theft. They're making the barrier to entry for this type of cybercrime a lot lower, whether it's making more all-inclusive tools, offering kind of services in regards to, we mentioned ransomware earlier. No opportunities being left on the table in regards to the ability to make money, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's political turmoil, especially in the US right now. But at the end of the day, it's important to understand where these cyber criminals sit in terms of technology, but also where their head's at in terms of kind of exploitation and almost theological in a way that, okay, are they focusing on these type of businesses? Are they focusing on this type of fear? Are they focusing on this type of world scenario right now? So it's very important to understand that kind of on a global level, but then more on a targeted level as your organization exists. So the most important, or I guess your biggest vulnerability, regardless of patch level, regardless of security measures, regardless of security countermeasures, you can have millions of dollars of security equipment, but humans or your employees are always going to be your biggest vulnerability. And unfortunately, there's not a one-size-fits-all patch. Security awareness training is always going to be the most important thing. Keeping employees up to date on what the biggest TTPs are, what the biggest threats are, how the attack surface looks in the organization, and what the current threat landscape looks like in terms of what threat actors are doing and how they're coming after organizations and how they're exploiting individuals. Obviously, part of your standard risk assessment and knowing what to protect is finding, classifying, and protecting all your data. Don't suck at patching. Patching, unfortunately, is one of the biggest failures that leads to successful compromise, simply because a patch wasn't installed. There's a vulnerability that exists on a accessible application that allows an attacker in. Encrypting data, and then obviously at rest and in motion, your TLS, SSL, but also at rest. But managing your keys in a way that they're rotated regularly, that they're secured in a proper manner, whether it's an HSM, whether it's Amazon Key Store, having a plan around key storage, monitoring usage across your entire environment, whether it's hybrid or homogeneous, but understanding that without logs and without monitoring your infrastructure, without knowing what's going on, it's harder to detect what's going on. And then kind of filtering out that noise from the signal, lowering that signal to noise ratio. Just a quick aside, the Target breach years ago was detected but wasn't noticed because of the noise and along with the actual event that took place. Utilizing cybersecurity technologies with defense in depth, and this is kind of important, understanding that a lot of organizations nowadays, and most organizations should subscribe to the assume breach technology. No longer is it safe or effective to protect your perimeter only. Knowing that a compromise could come from within, it could bypass your perimeter defenses. It could be an insider threat. It could be an employee that does something accidentally or maliciously. But being able to detect at all levels and protecting, like your infrastructure will be breached or has been breached, as opposed to we can protect it from being breached. The focus should be on minimizing dwell time there. Least access privilege control. That's kind of a no-brainer, only allowing certain access or minimal access, or the most minimal access for an employee to perform their job duty, and then offline backup, storage, business continuity, disaster recovery, that type of stuff. So Armor performs all this for our customers. We're data-driven, data-focused. Our goal is to provide 24/7 by 365 detections. So our customers send their log data to us. We curate that, use our threat intelligence. Again, my team curates that threat intelligence, but we curate our threat intelligence, signature match, heuristic match, tons of different processing and correlation through those events to determine what is anomalous, what's important, and what's noise. We lower that signal to noise ratio and minimize dwell time. In fact, our dwell time is stay about an average of a day, as opposed to the industry standard, which is almost 3 months. And then utilizing machine learning and artificial intelligence to kind of help there too. As far as resources are concerned, a lot of the information I covered in this talk is available on our website. We constantly publish threat reports and kind of keep our customers and visitors up to date on what the latest threats are, what the latest attack landscape is, and then kind of some information there on our security operations center and how we manage those 24/7 by 365 detections. That's it for this presentation. I'd like to take some questions and answers, or questions, see if I can provide some answers and see if we can kind of help there. One of the questions I've got here are ring fencing services like Encapsula and Cloudflare effective? Encapsula, I believe, is an Imperva product, which is a WAF. A WAF definitely helps. That's a good perimeter countermeasure, an active security measure for layer 7 web applications. One of the struggles there with a WAF, which Armor's kind of struggled with in the past, but we perfected it over the years, is being able to tune that to a particular web application. No two web applications are the same, so understanding what normal behavior is and that anomalous behavior is good. But Encapsula is definitely a good WAF that helps protect against at least the OWASP top 10 attacks, and it's definitely a good WAF, regardless of the brand, is good to help filter out some of those layer 7 attacks and kind of knock down a lot of that low-hanging fruit. As far as Cloudflare is concerned, Cloudflare offers a lot of good services in regards to SSL, to caching, to some light DDoS protection and security services there. But definitely security in depth is key. If you're using Encapsula, that shouldn't be your only layer 7 protection. If you're using Cloudflare, that shouldn't be your only network level protection, but those are definitely good starts. The next question here is, what password manager is the most secure? That's a tough one to answer. Personally, I like password managers that allow you to store your database locally, or your database in a place of your choosing. So password managers like LastPass and 1Password store your database on their servers. The saving grace there, I think, is your master password encrypts that before it sends the data to those services. So in theory, your data should be secure. If you're using a strong master password, when those get uploaded, things like Bitwarden or KeePass that allow you to either host your own service or store locally is a little bit more safe. But I think the the best answer to that question is the password manager that you use the most while using a strong, secure password, master password, which you rotate often, and you use different passwords per service. And one thing I want to mention real quick is a website called haveibeenpwned.com, PWNED. You can type in your email address and see what breaches you've been part of. That way you can change passwords. So I hope that helps. All right, so next question. To what degree has a transition from Bitcoin to Monero as the currency of choice complicated enforcement and prosecution? So I don't know if there's actually been a shift there. I know Monero is technologically more anonymous than Bitcoin in the way it handles transaction ledgers. I think the more anonymity it is, the more anonymity that there is, obviously hinders law enforcement and prosecution. But even with Bitcoin, there's services out there that allow crypto laundering, for instance, that will take money from a single wallet and filter it through a bunch of different wallets and kind of provide a lot of noise or a lot of red herrings, so to speak, for that crypto. But I think crypto in general, as is cash, I mean, it's just like cash. There's no way to see, unless you can start getting into DNA and forensic evidence that way, but which normally isn't done. But as far as cash is concerned, it's just as anonymous. So I think Monero and Zcash and Dash that have focused more on the anonymity standpoint definitely make it harder, but I don't think it's necessarily the go-to. Bitcoin is kind of the gold of crypto, if you will. Do we have any more questions? All right. Looks like that's all the questions there. I appreciate you guys and girls hanging out for this talk. I hope you learned some. Obviously, I'll be available. My information's there if you want to shoot an email over, or you're definitely able to visit our website. Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to our investigative news and documents service and attending our events. For more information, visit offshorealert.com.